wouldn't be entitled to make that long-term application.
Okay. So, any other changes?
Yes, well, I mean, one of the if I go to the offices actually, because over this whole period, the visa offices have virtually been closed all across the world, and here in the UK as well for people that are submitting applications here in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Now, slowly, things are opening up. So, but what people need to do is keep checking on the VFS and the TLS websites, depending on which company is within your country, to see whether your particular VFS office has opened up. So things are slowly starting to get back to normal for them to open up their offices and take the appointments for biometrics, etc. That's also happening here in the UK, where offices have opened up for people to go and do their biometrics now and to take their documents into the Home Office. The thing with that is, though, it's still slow running. Not all of their offices have completely opened up yet. And what they're trying to do is take on the backlog of the people who'd previously applied, had an appointment, but weren't able to go to that appointment because of COVID and the offices closing down. And those that have, for the last few months had applications submitted, but haven't had an appointment yet. So it's still really difficult to get an appointment within that system, but you've just got to keep checking on a daily basis.
Right. Okay. So,
but it's a sign that the country's opening up again.
It's good. It's a positive sign that we are open for business, I suppose.
Absolutely. I mean, the quicker we kind of get back to normal, the quicker, hopefully, things will level out for everybody.
True. So anything...
One of the most important changes that's just come into place, Ajaz, if I can go through is for the people that have to have a certain amount of income. So especially on a spouse visa, for example, you've got to be earning $18,600 if you want to extend your visa here in the UK, even as a spouse.
Yeah.
Your partner or yourself have got to be earning. Now, obviously, with the issues with regards to coronavirus, some people have had their income completely stopped. Some people have been furloughed, so the income's gone down. But we've been waiting for so long on this, but the Home Office finally in June have announced that the people that have experienced a loss of income due to coronavirus, they will have their income considered for the period immediately before the coronavirus income loss came about. Mm-hmm. So as long as you can show 6 months up to the March 2020 showing the right amount of income, then the Home Office will accept that, even if you're putting in your application now.
Right. Okay.
Now, that'll be a huge relief to a lot of people who've been so worried about what they're going to do.
Yes, we had a call. This is going back during the month of Ramadan. We had a call from someone from Dudley, I remember, and he had this concern that one of his relatives was on furlough. And he was thinking, well, hold on, I think it was his daughter possibly, what's going to happen if she's on furlough, she's on 80%, and therefore she's not going to make the minimum amount over the last 6 months. So what?
Well, if she's been furloughed, it's slightly different.
Okay.
They'll look at your salary. If for anybody that's furloughed, they'll look at your salary as if you're earning the 100% and not the 80%.
Okay. So I assume you then have to prove that your salary is because of the drop in your salary is because of furlough and not any other reason.
Well, yes, you'd have proof that you're on furlough, and obviously your pay slips will then reflect that as well, that it's gone down by 20%, and your employer will be able to confirm that within the letter that they write as well.
I think that's vital. I think that's vital that they do include that, although that's not obviously a normal thing that you ask them to do, but I think they in this circumstance they'd have to.
Absolutely, they need to put the information in so that what the Home Office don't necessarily like to do is make checks on things that are going to benefit you. Mm-hmm. So it's better that you provide all the evidence to them.
Yeah. Okay, that's
So the best way to do it is to provide as much evidence of everything that's happening within your life financially at that point as possible.
hmm
So it's in a way it's done. They've done it in three kind of ways. For people that have lost their income, they can count the period, the 6 months up to the 20th of March.
hmm
The people that are furloughed, they will look at it as though it's 100% instead of the 80%.
hmm
And if you're self-employed, obviously there's going to be a bit of a loss to your income potentially as well. And what they said is that a loss of annual income due to coronavirus between the 1st of March 2020 and the 31st of July 2020 will generally be disregarded along with the impact on employment income from the same period.
So
So,
how is a self-employed person
mhm.
supposed to evidence that the loss has been just in that period, and not?
they'll be they'll be able to show it through what income they've had in during that period, won't they?
Mm,
So
mm.
they'll have the kind of the invoices and the books. The accounts will be able to show it,
I suppose the bank
and
statements.
the bank statements, the accounts, and on a self-employed person, I would actually even advise that the accountant should provide a letter which confirms the problems that the business has faced
hmm
and the periods in which they've had lower takings and the effect that it's had on the business. I think a letter from an accountant that is regarded by the Home Office as somebody who's independent would be sufficient as well. But you, again, provide as much of that evidence as you can to show that you were in that position,
hmm
because it's for you to show your case.
Yeah.
It's not for the Home Office to dig and find that information.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and they won't.
Yeah,
if you leave it to them, they won't.
exactly. I've been doing this for 15 years now on immigration, and the Home Office aren't there to help you in that sense. So it's for you to do your job. They'll find things that go against you, but they won't necessarily find things that help you.
Well, they also say that God helps those who help themselves. So yeah, it's quite relevant in this situation as well. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah,
So
that's really interesting. And so this has come about as of, was it March or just now?
they've only introduced this in June.
Okay, okay.
So
Oh,
I know, because with a lot of us immigration solicitors have been lobbying for this,
hmm
but they just weren't forthcoming with the information, because obviously there are so many people that are in this situation. I mean, the UK residents are, so the visa nationals are also going to be within those positions where they have either lost their jobs or been put on furlough. So it should be taken into account, because it's through no fault of their own, really, isn't it? So
yeah, true.
at least the Home Office have finally listened.
So I guess there's still students. I know students was a big thing, going back 5-6 years ago. There's quite an influx of students from the Asian subcontinent, but they are still students here. What will the situation be for them? Is it any different to before lockdown, or are there any changes?
There have been changes, and some of this stuff has been updated in the month of June again.
Okay.
I mean, some of the things that have come into place, for example, distance learning became the situation for a lot of students once coronavirus hit, with the universities putting everything on the net and having online tutorials, etc. So what the Home Office have said is, and it applies to both existing students and any new students that will be coming in as soon as circumstances allow, that distance learning will be permitted. Now, usually that's not something that would be permitted, because they would say that you could do that from your own country. You don't need to come into the UK to do that. But due to the coronavirus, up until the foreseeable future, that is going to be permitted.
Okay.
And so, also, what they said is about another thing is about extending your Tier 4 visa.
Mm-hmm.
So usually when students that need to repeat a year, retake a module or resit an exam, they're going to be exempt basically from demonstrating that their academic progression, as they normally would have to, for cases when they're reapplying in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you haven't progressed, you can still extend your visa on the basis that you do need to repeat some of the modules or retake a whole year. One of the main things that's been a good thing is the working hours, the 20-hour restriction that a lot of people are faced with.
Are you going to tell me they're lifted?
It's been lifted,
right.
But it's for those that are working within the NHS. So for doctors, nurses, paramedics.
Right, okay.
Those are the type of people that it's basically been lifted
Key
for.
workers, basically.
And it also lifted for those where the sponsor has suspended the study completely for the time being, because some universities have suspended study, and in those cases they can also work the full-time hours if they choose to do so.
All right, okay. That's again quite helpful for any students listening in, or any listeners who have students in their friend or family circle, foreign students, I would say. Oh, brilliant! I mean, is there any other updates as far as you're aware?
Well, one thing that I would mention is the graduate route, which is due to be launched in the summer 2021, which will allow students then to stay on to gain some work experience in the UK. I think it's going to be quite similar to the post-study worker route that used to exist.
Okay.
That's still due to be launched.
When's it launching, did you say?
Sorry?
Do you know when it's launching?
Summer 2021.
All right, next year.
Yeah,
well,
next year.
Hopefully
that
a lot of things
will come into place.
Hopefully we'll be back to some sort of normality by then if we have this vaccine.
Well, that's the thing. And one of the good things that the Home Office has said is that the students who begin their course of study through distance learning can still switch into that category as long as they've entered the UK before the 6th of April 2021, right, and they complete their final semester of study in the UK.
Okay.
So it can even apply to those who've been in the UK for a very short period of time for their studies.
Right. Okay. Right. I think you've covered most of the things that I felt were needed to be updated on. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
No, I think that's the main updates that have happened at the moment. But what people should be aware of is that there are changes happening all the time. So they really do need to kind of keep up to date with it, or instruct a solicitor that will look into those issues for you, because especially during those times, you don't want to make mistakes that are then going to affect the rest of your immigration history. So, I mean, at Kenneth Jones Solicitors, we're really happy to help anybody that has any queries, that even if your visa isn't due at this point, but it's going to be due in a few months' time, it's better to get to the solicitors first to make sure that you're able to gather everything together in time, etc. So at Kenneth Jones Solicitors, you can give us a call at any time. We're really willing to help you.
I've got a couple of more questions which have just come to my mind. First of all, for spouse visas,
yes,
I know there are people who have been waiting since before lockdown to try and get their spouses, over here, to join them over here, to continue their family life. Now, with most countries being in lockdown, that has obviously been delayed. Are any of the countries now, is the British embassies and foreign offices open in any of those countries?
Some of them are. So they've started slowly opening up some of the countries, but they're countries such as Australia, New Zealand, the ones that the coronavirus rates have been low and the country's completely opened out. But even America at the moment, none of the visa offices are open. Pakistan, India, none of those visa offices are still open. We check on a daily basis. I think that's the first thing I do each morning on a working day, to see what's actually opened up. But it's hopefully within the coming weeks that will happen, because they're slowly starting to get back to normal. But it is going to be very much dependent on the rates of infection and deaths within that particular country, because they're not going to want to get their staff into the offices and be in a situation where they're going to be in danger. I think that's one of the main reasons for these offices remaining closed, even in countries where lockdowns essentially lifted. but the virus rates are still high.
Yeah, I've had many text messages from people saying, "Brother, have they lifted? Can I get my wife over now, etc., etc." But my answer has always been, "No. Well, you'll have to wait a bit longer. How long? I can't tell you." But I suppose it depends on the situation in that particular country, how safe it is for those workers to go back to work there. Which,
Absolutely.
which leads me to my next question. A lot of
Hmm.
people have applied for extensions, but were unable to extensions or indefinite leave, etc., in this country, and were unable to get appointments to submit documents and biometrics. Now, what is the situation there? I believe some people are now still applying, and I don't think they're getting appointments, are they?
At the moment, it's like I explained a little while ago, that visa offices have opened up. Now, initially, they only opened for the people that had already got an application in the system, and they'd also already booked an appointment which had been cancelled by the Home Office because everything locked down. So initially, it was only opened up to those people. Now, slowly, they're extending the periods of who can actually get an appointment.
Right.
So it's slowly opening up,
Okay.
but it's still going to take a little bit of time for everything to catch up, because obviously they're not working at the full capacity that they used to work to,
Sure.
because they have to maintain social distancing and everything. And
Right.
the backlog that they've got for about 3 months.
Sejal, we only got 25 seconds left before we go into a break, so I'd like to thank you for coming on and guiding us and guiding our listeners in relation to all the updates for immigration law, and look forward to having you on again sometime soon. Next time there's an update. Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you again. Bye.
Bye. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back from the break. Before we went into the commercial break, we had Sejal Karavadra, who's an immigration solicitor, on telling us about all the recent updates we have in our immigration policies and laws. Quite helpful to any students, any one applying for spouse visas, anyone applying for extensions. So, as I said at the start of the show, we will be covering commercial landlord and tenant law in this segment of the show. Now, as you should be aware from the news, there's a shopping centre giant into which owns the likes of Maryhill Centre, the Braehead Centre in Scotland, the Trafford Centre in Manchester, and various other centres like the Lakeside Centre in down south. They've gone into administration. Now, the reason for this is quite obvious with COVID-19. If they've obviously had a lot of debts, and with COVID-19, their tenants may not have been able to pay their rents. Shopping centres have been closed. So, the inevitable happened. Now, so what went wrong? The coronavirus lockdown is obviously speeding up the trend towards buying online. So consumers are buying goods online and not at work. So you're not having to go into stores. So if people aren't going into stores, they're getting used to buying online. So obviously then it will affect even the retailers. The point I want to next make is that with Into being a hugely complicated corporate structure, it's funny that even though the company has gone into administration, the shopping centres haven't. They are separate companies owned by banks and lenders, etc. So the banks have now got the keys. Now, shoppers like you and I aren't really going to notice any real difference in the short term. But I suppose the shopping centres will be sold, so buyers will be sought. So, however, who's going to buy them? In times like this, who will want to put up the capital to buy these, huge centres, which, with changing trends, may not again survive? So I've been having a look at some figures here. So according to the annual report published in March, this is for the centre, the centre's debts were worth 68% of its assets, which is a jump of 53% a year earlier. I mean, rent collected in 2020 for them has dropped from 310 million down to 310 million from 492 million a year earlier. So clearly, that drop of 180 odd million has had a huge effect on them. Now, according to a publication which Property Week, I believe it's called, landlords collected just 18% of commercial rents for the 3 months in June, 3 months to June the 24th, as in just 4 days ago. So only 18% of rents were collected. Again, this is the reason. What I want to move on to now is, with all of these issues that they've had, obviously their tenants will be worried. They obviously are worried, but their tenants will be worried as to where they stand. And any other landlord, any other landlord or tenant in commercial premises would also be now thinking, maybe on a smaller scale even, but thinking, well, what if my business doesn't succeed? If it doesn't get back on its feet, what would I be able to do? What will happen with these premises? As a tenant, you'd be thinking, oh, will I be able to pay this rent? Would I need to, ask the landlord for a further extension, if they've already had an extension in rent payments, or what else can we do to try and recover? As a landlord, you'd be thinking, what if my tenant doesn't pay? Some landlords, may have huge debts themselves. They may owe money on the commercial premises that they purchased. So the banks would be expecting their mortgage payments. But obviously, as a landlord, sometimes what happens is you get the rent, you pass it on to the bank, keep what you want, and pass the mortgage on to the bank. So testing times for everyone. Testing times for all businesses, regardless of whether you're a big corporate, or a small man running a little shop or something on a little high street or a back street somewhere. Now, so rent recovery and protection is what commercial landlords would want to address. Actually, they'd want to know, what do I have, what can I do to recover rent, and what protection is there. Now, the restrictions imposed during COVID-19 on landlords are quite immense. I mean, as for forfeiture of commercial leases, the Section 82 of the Coronavirus Act 2020 prevents any forfeiture between 26th of March. It was initially till the 30th of June. However, that has now been extended to 30th of September this year. It doesn't actually mean that it won't be extended again. So for now, it's still the 30th of September, but the government will obviously see what the situation is going up closer to September and closer to the 30th of September. And they may make further extensions if necessary. We hope it's not necessary, because if it is necessary, it means that businesses aren't surviving. And, as a nation, as a country, we're struggling economically. Now, whether by proceedings or peaceful re-entry, a landlord cannot take the property back at the moment, as far as commercial. I must stress this is commercial we're discussing, not residential. So whether by proceedings or peaceful re-entry, are the vast majority of commercial leases for non-payment of any sums due under the lease. Those sums remain due, however, and only an express waiver will waive the right to forfeit when the restriction period ends. So those tenants who think that, oh, yes, I don't have to pay at the moment, yes, the rent still remains due. You may have a grace period. You may have a period where your landlord is happy to let you be there without having to pay the rent, but that will still remain due at the end of the term or during the term. And definitely when you are required to, after the 30th of September, if that's the end date. Now, also, the other thing that has happened is there's a stay of all possession proceedings. So there's a practice direction, which has stayed all possession proceedings for 90 days from 27th of March until 25th of June. which has now passed, um, accept claims against persons unknown. Now, this period has now been extended until 23rd of August. So it was till June, but now it's up until 23rd of August. Now, this has been changed by the civil procedure rules themselves, as per the Coronavirus Act again. Now, commercial rent recovery. Now, this is an interesting point, actually. So, yes, you cannot forfeit the lease. However, there may be options to recover your commercial rent or any debts owed. So, taking control of goods and certification of enforcement agents prevents landlords from using CRAR, which is commercial rent and arrear recovery, unless an amount of at least 90 days rent was due. It has previously been 7 days or more, but from 24th of June, this has been increased to at least 189 days rent under the Taking Control of Goods and Certification of Enforcement Agents Regulations 2020. So you can clearly see that, regulations and rules are constantly changing to take into account current situations. Now, this restriction also now applies until 30th of September or such later date that may be specified in the regulations. The next thing is statutory demands and winding up. I mean, with the commercial recovery, I was discussing this with another solicitor the other day. That, the landlord approached me saying, I can't go on any longer. I've not had any rent for so long. I think it was like a 7 months period now, and obviously I can't take possession. What can I do? So this is the option that we gave them: the commercial rent arrears recovery. That maybe you can approach them using this, and maybe not take control, but at least take control of goods and try and recover your lost rent. Now, the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Bill, when passed into law, will prohibit the presentation of a winding up petition based on an unsatisfied statutory demand served between 1st of March 2020 and 30th September 2020. It is anticipated that the bill will become law in late June or early July. It's not currently, so we're looking to have it, in the next few weeks. It will also be possible to present a winding up petition between 27th of April and 30th of September. So since 27th of April, you can present a winding up petition, unless it can be shown that coronavirus has not worsened the debtor's financial position, or the debtor could not have paid its debt even if there had been no such worsening of its financial position. So, despite these restrictions, there are still obviously a range of options that remain open to landlords. Now, a landlord may be able to recover rent arrears and other sums due under the lease from former tenants and their guarantors. So some have guarantors in place, which I always recommend. It helps. If a tenant is not able to pay, you always have the option of going to the guarantor, and 80% of the time that works in getting your rent back. However, landlords must be aware of the controls and restrict timescales on the use of this remedy imposed by the Landlord and Tenant Act 1995. In short, if the lease is an old lease, i.e. one which was granted prior to 1st of January 96, a landlord can recover from the original tenant or any former tenant who was given a direct covenant to be liable for the remainder of the term or their respective guarantors. If the lease is a new lease, i.e., which has been granted since January '96, a landlord can recover arrears from the former tenant if the former tenant has given an authorized guarantee agreement. So an AGA, many of you might have heard of an AGA, or from a guarantor who has guaranteed the performance of one under a guarantee agreement. Now, in order to pursue a former tenant or the guarantor under either the old or new leases, the requirement is that a landlord to first serve a formal Section 17 notice in a prescribed form within 6 months of a fixed charge falling due. A fixed charge includes rent, service charges, and any other liquidated sums due under a lease, and interest due on those fixed charges. A failure to serve a valid Section 17 notice within the 6 months period will result in the landlord losing its right to pursue those who have retained liability for any breaches of the covenants to pay fixed charges on a current tenant. Now, what I want to go on to now, I feel maybe a bit of a Q&A. If anyone wants to call in or WhatsApp any questions that they have in relation to commercial leases, the studio number is 01902 972 150, and the WhatsApp number to WhatsApp any questions you have is 07 440 420 432. Now, there are many questions that I already have here prepared to answer, which may be relevant. So I have one here, which is, can a tenant stop paying rent? Now, this will depend on what the lease says about when rent may be suspended, but most leases will not provide for the current situation. Rent suspensions, often called rent seizures, usually apply when the property is unusable because it has been damaged by an insured risk. Although the impact of COVID-19 is immense and unprecedented, it is unlikely to constitute damage to the property. In practice, the landlord may be willing to agree to a temporary switch to monthly rent instead of quarterly, or even a rent holiday for a fixed period. Now, arrangements like this must be carefully drafted, so I would say speak to your solicitor first. Many of you may have already agreed some terms, but if not, then please speak to a solicitor. Is the government doing anything to help commercial tenants? The short answer to that is yes. As I've been talking about in the last 20 minutes, there's a lot of legislation flying about at the moment and constantly changing. So the government is doing quite a bit to try and assist commercial tenants. So you have a holiday from business rates and VAT deferral. There will now be a temporary ban on landlords forfeiting a lease where the tenant has failed to make payments. So we discussed that before as well. So there is quite a bit that the government, is doing. Government realizes that these businesses are the core to recovery. So anything they can do to assist these, especially small businesses, that's what will get the nation back on its feet. So will insurance for loss of rent cover a few years? Again, probably not, because it is usually triggered by damage to the property. Even tenants' own business interruption insurance is usually linked to the business being adversely affected by damage or trading premises. So although it is worth getting your solicitor to look carefully at your policy wording, I should say, but as a general rule, I would not say that it would be covered. So, how will turnover rent be affected? Well, clearly, most tenants' turnover will reduce significantly in the current situation. Most leases will, with rents based on turnover, will provide a minimum base rent to be payable as well as the turnover element. That will probably continue to be payable for the reasons explained earlier, but the turnover element will be greatly reduced. Now, if the landlord decides to close the premises, for instance, as we were talking about Into, so if Into were to decide, or the administrators would decide to close those premises, will it be liable to the tenants? So under normal circumstances, the tenant would have to claim against the landlord for derogation from grant. So in other words, denying the tenant its right to occupy under the lease. At present, it will be extremely difficult for tenants to show that they have suffered loss as a result of the landlord's action, especially where the government has ordered premises to close. However, they are now opening up again, and if this closure affects, then there may be some landlords who are liable. The landlord may also have the right to close common parts where force majeure applies. So again, the common parts being the in a shopping mall, common parts are obviously the hallway which you walk through in order to get to the different shops. Now, I have many more questions here, but I am short on time. I only have just under a minute left. So what I would do now is I'll stop talking about this subject, which may be boring some of you. If any of you guys have any legal questions, please WhatsApp us and I'll try to get them answered. If you have topics which you want me to cover, if I can bring on guests who specialize in different areas of law and try and cover anything that you guys want covered, and see if we can help you help yourselves. Now, thank you for listening, and I am Ajaz Ali. This is the Law Clinic, and you're listening to me on Radio Ramadan Wolverhampton. And Allah Hafiz.